Good morning. Boker Tov. As we come back together over here again Sunday morning, I want to tell you to all my dear friends over here that this Sunday morning period of time that we have to learn together is very special to me. It almost like changes my mood for the positive. Sometimes Sunday morning you could be in a not as an uppity mood as you are on Shabbos, which is so special. It comes Sunday morning back into the sort of grind and comes to this class, and it is very, very special to be able to share words of Torah and then the feedback that I get and discussions and so on. So it's very special to me. Thank you very, very much for the opportunity that we have to spend some time together sharing the wisdom and words of Torah. Okay, with that, we begin our bracha, our blessing on the delicious coffee. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihiya bidvaro. Okay, let's get straight to it. Okay, so the title of the class is, and the rabbi said that you are ugly. I didn't make that up. That's actually a story in the Gemara, in the Talmud. It's a very strange story, and we'll analyze that story as an answer to a question that commentaries ask on the portion that we just read, which is Parshas Vayera. The portion of Vayera, is what we read last week. And there is a question there that's asked by commentaries, and the Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson addresses that question with a beautiful lesson, and not only lesson, but approach that we have to both ourselves and to others around us. So I want to discuss it Sunday morning. Let's relax. Let's learn some Torah. Let's get into it. Okay. So in the parsha, the past week's Torah portion, Parshas Vayera, we read that God says to Abraham, very famous verse, and it was the meme that I created before Shabbat that was sent out. God says that the reason why he loves Abraham, you will have a chumash handy over here. He says he loves Abraham because I know that he will be a great nation. Why? Because I know and I love the fact that he will do acts of kindness and justice, both for himself, and he will educate his family and his offspring to do so. So there are many compliments. In general, God gives very, very few compliments in the Bible. Very few compliments. Here, he chooses to explain, within the context of the story of Sodom, the overturning of Sodom and Amorah, or what's known as Sodom and Gomorrah. But in the Hebrew, in the Parsha, it's Sodom va'Amorah. And over there, in that context, God, of course, has notifies to Abraham first what he's going to do. And he says that I need to notify Abraham because he'll be a great nation and he will educate his family, as mentioned, to kindness and justice and so on. So we know that Abraham excelled with kindness and hospitality, specifically hachnasat orchim, inviting guests. In the beginning of the portion, it says that Abraham, even though he was right after a circumcision and he was in a lot of pain, so the Torah tells us over there that Abraham pined for guests. He wanted guests, and that's when the three people, or the three angels disguised as people, came, and Abraham invited them in despite his pain with the greatest hospitality. Now, however, in this whole story, we find something that begs a question. It says that Avram Avinu, and this is based on Rashi and the Medrash and Talmud, it says when Avram Avinu would have guests coming into his tent in the desert from all and every young child that goes to Cheder knows and has been taught that Avram's tent was open from all sides, so that as the verse says, and Vayita Eshel, that Avram planted a tent. So it was open from all four sides so that guests could come and feel welcomed and so on. But we find then a situation which is interesting, and again begs the question that after the people ate, Avram Avinu would say to them the following: I want you, there's no bill There's no bill. It's all free. It's on the house. But there's one condition. There's one stipulation. The stipulation is that you have to bless the Almighty. You must bless the Almighty. You must say, blessed is the Almighty from who we've eaten, that shachalnu mishloi, we ate his food. And if, says Rashi, if the guests would refuse, then Abraham our father would say, if you refuse, then I'll give you a bill for the food. And where are you going to get food here in the desert, a 5-star hotel? It's going to be a hefty bill. When the guests would hear that, they would say, okay, and they would bless God Almighty. And this, of course, begs the question, what is the achievement over here? What's the gain? It's almost like, to use the analogy, when your teenager acts out, and then, of course, the teenager comes to you and says, Dad or Mom, could you do this for me? And you say, well, you owe me an apology. And the teenager says, yeah, I'm sorry. Life goes on. And so, it's not it's kind of clear that it's not a real and a genuine apology. So what would be the gain over here of Abraham saying to them that either you bless God or I hand you a hefty bill, a large bill? Doesn't seem to make any sense. Okay. So the Rebbe, again, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson goes on to explain this peculiar behavior. I don't know if peculiar is the right word, but this seemingly ineffectual, coercive behavior on behalf of Avraham Avinu. He explains it with the following story. Actually, the Rebbe brings 2 stories. We'll see if we have time to bring both stories, because they're both stories that bring home the point. And here I'm going to read the story from the Talmud. This is from Tractate Tainus, which deals with a lot of the fast days within the Jewish calendar and some of the laws associated with it. And in the Talmud, there's the following story. Maisa. Maisa means a story. You ever, a little Yiddish, perhaps you had the merit of your Zayda, of your grandfather, telling you a Maisa, telling you a story of the good old days. Okay. Maisa Sheba Rabbi Eliezer ben Reb Shimon. There was a Rabbi Eliezer ben Reb Shimon came to a certain locale. Rabbi Eliezer ben Reb Shimon is the Rabbi Eliezer, the son of the famous Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the sage that we celebrate in Miron on Lag BaOmer. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Reb Shimon was one of the great Talmudic rabbis. There's some very interesting stories in the Talmud about him as well. And he says, the Talmud there continues after a certain introduction. He says, Nizdamin loy odom echad. Sorry for this. We actually have a children's mitzvah club going on now. And that's amazing. And you're always to bring your children. Anyway, so he said, so the Talmud says, Nizdamin loy odom echad shahoya mechuyor biyoyseir. He encountered an individual that was extremely ugly. Extremely ugly. Yes, you heard correctly. He was just like very difficult to look at. Omaloi, he said, Rabbi Eliezer ben Reb Shimon said to him, Reka, you empty one. Kama mechur oisai ha'ish. How ugly, how unappealing is that person, meaning you. And the Talmud tells us a couple of more details, and then the Talmud tells us that the fellow responded to Rabbi Eliezer ben Reb Shimon, and he said to him the following answer. He says, you're referring to me as ugly? Leich lo uman shasa'ani, go ahead and go to the craftsman who has made me. Meaning, if you think I'm so ugly and you're accusing me of my ugliness and you're attacking me and you're insulting me about my ugliness, leich lo uman shasa'ani, go to the craftsman who formed me, who made me, meaning go to God Almighty, who is the creator, and that's that. And the Talmud states that the rabbi actually apologized, and and the fellow who this insult was directed to forgave him on the one condition that he does not go ahead and act again in that manner. So that's the gist of the story in the Talmud, with more details there is over there. And of course, this story is so strange. We're talking about even a what we would call a regular human being, doesn't go over to someone and say, you're so ugly. Never mind a rabbi, and never mind a rabbi of the Talmud of such a lofty stature would not go ahead and tell someone, you're so ugly. In Yiddish, you would say, it's Yiddish, it's Hebrew Yiddish, you're so ugly. So, what's going on over here? And when we're talking about holy rabbis, what? So he told him, Lech Loman Shasani, go to my creator. I mean, there's obvious questions over here. Besides it being highly rude, did Rabbi Elazar not know that this is the handiwork of God, that this individual had to tell him, you know what? Go to my creator. And is it something that only after he said to him, go to my creator, then he apologizes? Meaning it's almost like the rabbi did not know that this is God's doing. Oh, now that you're telling me it's God's doing, oh, I apologize. I mean, isn't that like an obvious? What did this individual enlighten, sort of, open the eyes of the rabbi, that Rabbi Elazar, by telling him, go to my creator, and now Rabbi Elazar says, okay, he backs off, and he says, I apologize. He knew that before he started this whole situation. We're not talking about just regular stuff. And the Talmud is telling us the story for us to learn something from it. What's going on over here? So the Rebbe gives a very insightful explanation into this Talmudic story with the following. He says that, of course, Rabbi Elazar was not addressing just this person's physical features. Rabbi Elazar went ahead. Rabbi Elazar sensed in this person a coarseness, a lack of sensitivity, or his physical ugliness to Rabbi Elazar's keen spiritual eye was a indicator of this person's spiritual lowliness. And Rabbi Elazar wasn't off on that. He was right about that. And Rabbi Elazar's intention, or his intent over here, was not to insult him per se. That was not his intent. That would never be. That is absolutely forbidden. It's a biblical prohibition to insult somebody just for the sake of insulting. What Rabbi Elazar's intention over here was, there are situations where a person sometimes needs a real shakeup in order for them to change and improve their ways. To articulate that a little bit more, the general approach to trying to influence and impact a person is first, of course, with love. Revealed love, open love. A hug, a kind word, a word of encouragement. That is the way, which is why, Kabbalistically, in the Kabbalah, chesed, kindness, which represents also ahava, love, is the first of the emotional attributes. However, there's also the next one, which is gevura, which is severity. There is a period of time, there is a situation, would be more correct, there is a situation where a person becomes so addicted and so drowned in either negativity or unholiness, that the only way to break them forth is a jolt, in a sense of what we would call. Yesterday I was talking to an individual, and I was complimenting that person's teenager. And I said, I really love their spunk, and the parent responds, yeah, but he needs a good zetz. You know what a zetz is in Yiddish? He needs a good spanking, was the response. So there is a time, and don't jump to conclusions yet. We're going to further discuss this. There's a time where the only way to jolt a person out of that addiction, or it's almost like what we would call in today's society, a person sometimes either on their own, which is what sometimes needs to happen, or sometimes through some force outside of themselves needs to sort of hit rock bottom in order to to break loose of that addiction, coarseness, lack of spiritual connection, etc. I had a story, and I'm going to be somewhat vague in order to, I want to back up for a second. I want to share another story that the Rebbe brings here in the Sikha. The Rebbe says the following. The Rebbe brings a story with the Rebbe Rashab. I'm sharing this story with the Rebbe Rashab also. The Rebbe Rashab was the 5th Chabad Rebbe. Tonight is his birthday. So when it's a tzaddik's birthday, it brings forth blessing and inspiration to all. And it's the way we connect to the holy soul of the tzaddik is by learning something about them. And that connects us to their holy and positive energy. So there's a story with the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe relates, once had a disciple of his, a chassid of his, a follower of his, come in and ask for a blessing for some very difficult situation that the chassid found himself in. He needed a blessing, whether it was for health or for livelihood. It was something that was really pressing him, really he was in some sort of real Torah and a real problem. And he went into the Rebbe Rashab for a private audience, and he asked the Rebbe Rashab for a blessing. The Rebbe Rashab, again, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, responded to him, "I'm sorry, I cannot help you." The chassid who heard this, he came out of the room, and he was devastated. And that the Rebbe, the holy tzaddik, the holy righteous man, which the Talmud says that tzaddikim have the power to bless and change bad decrees, and the Rebbe said he can't help him, he was absolutely devastated, and he broke down crying. The Rebbe Rashab had an older brother. His oldest brother's name was the Rabbi Zalman Aharon. Rabbi Zalman Aharon saw this chassid, this follower of his brother, crying bitter tears. So he asked him, he says, "What's going on? Perhaps I could help." So he told him, he says, "I went into your brother, to the Rebbe. I asked for a blessing. He said, I can't help me. If I can't get a blessing from the Rebbe, all is lost. I'm devastated." And he continued to cry bitterly. So the Razah said to him, the Rabbi Zalman Aharon said, "Let me go talk to my brother and see, perhaps I could, change the situation for your betterment." So he went into his brother, being there, even though the Rebbe was the Rebbe, and his older brother had all the respect that he had for his younger brother, the Rebbe, but being the older brother, he walked in and he sort of softly reprimanded his brother, saying, "How is it that someone comes to you and asks for a blessing that you just so sort of abruptly and so harshly tell him, I can't help you?" Give him some words of encouragement, try to lift him up, have faith in God. There's things you could say, but you were like so harsh. You caused him to lose all hope. He's out there, he's crying, he's totally in pieces. So the Rebbe Rashab heard what his older brother told him, and he says, "Tell him to come back in." The chassid came back into the Rebbe Rashab, and the Rebbe Rashab gave him a blessing. And as the Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Elshneisen, relates the story, he says that his blessing came to fruition, and he was, and God went ahead and helped him from whatever tzara, whatever problem that he was in, and the blessing of the tzaddik was effective. So the Rebbe here also asks the question. The Rebbe Rashab, such a holy individual, needed his brother to tell him that you don't just turn a fellow chassid away in such a way that you cause him such pain. He needed his brother to tell him that. Didn't he have basic love for a fellow? I mean, what's going on over here? So here too, the Rebbe says that the Rebbe Rashab looked at this person and that came into him in his private audience, where the usual standard procedure is the Rebbe would give a person a blessing in the most loving way. In this particular case, he saw that this individual, in the current state that he was in, would not be a keli, would not be a vessel to receive the blessing that can change his situation for the better. It's only after that break where he felt that where he became so humbled and so broken that then the Rabbi Rashab said, oh, if that's the situation, now let him come back in, and now he will be a vessel for that blessing, and I will bless him, and God did send him the help that he needed. So getting back to the Talmudic story, I had a situation last week. I always like to learn of lessons, and it's an ongoing situation. I will try to be vague as to protect the privacy of the individual that's involved, and that's in this sad situation. And God willing, that the very fact that we're talking about that situation and learning about it over here, and hopefully it'll inspire us, all of us, to a better place, that this would help this individual in the help that they need. So last week, early morning, I was in the middle of the usual morning prayers. It's probably, 6:45, 6:50. And I get a message from someone who says, Rabbi, I need to talk to you. And the person reached out, was a family member that was in a very dark place, sort of emotionally. And the person reached out knowing that I know the family well for many years, and shared with me some of the challenges that are going on over here. And later on, I called this family member, and we spoke, and the person was in a very dark place. And, when I say a very dark place, really someone that needed observation and so on. And the gist of our discussion was that there are times, like a seed that has the potential to grow into a beautiful tree and give forth so much fruit. First, what needs to happen, it has to be put into the ground. It has to rot. It has to decompose. And the very decomposing of the seed allows it to burst forth and give so much that it has, which is far more than the seed itself. The seed all of a sudden multiplies in almost like an infinite way in terms of comparing to what the seed is and what it can become. But what it needs to do first is decompose, because sometimes we're sort of locked in a given situation or addicted to a certain situation, and it's only the breaking out of that situation in a very sort of deep to the core way that allows for that amazing growth. And I said to this person, who, by the way, had what we would call the American dream. And when I mean the American dream, I almost mean like the modern American dream, where the person was living a life of no commitment, of just self-gratification, had the means to do so, but no life of structure, of responsibility, of selflessness in terms of a family, in terms of a spouse, in terms of raising children. It was just a life of self-gratification. And I said to this person, it's not healthy. I mean, my focus was more on where you should go rather than where you are, because of the dark place a person was in. But the point is that, you have so much going for you. You have so much going for you. You have so much good within you. And I know this person, and you have so many qualities, but it's like in a seed. It's being kept rather than blossoming, which you have so much to give that can blossom for yourself, for your family, for society, and so on. And you find yourself now in this situation. It's God's way of saying to you, you need to, He's breaking you out of that. He's breaking you out of that. And that's why you find yourself in this situation. The sooner you will come to terms with your inner amazing self, you'll be able to get out of this dark place. So, This is the explanation as well of what Avram Avinu. Let me go back for a second. I remember a story. It's a cute story. It's a true story because I remember the story. I was there. This goes back years ago. I had to guess, probably 40 years ago. And we used to stand every single Friday on the streets of Manhattan or other parts of New York City with the mitzvah tank. Some of you might remember the mitzvah tank. You give us a thumbs up if you remember the mitzvah tanks, little mobile homes that we would rent every single week from the main Chabad office. It was a period of time where I had the merit with a couple of friends to sort of run that program. And there are so many people who did mitzvahs, beautiful mitzvahs, just because of those mitzvah thanks. And so we used to stand on the streets and ask whether you would like to put on film, whether you're Jewish and come to a mitzvah, whatever it is. Many interesting encounters happened at those Friday mitzvah tank project or experiences, whatever. So I remember once we were in Manhattan, I think it was Manhattan, and a fellow walked by that, looked very Jewish. There's sometimes someone has a very Jewish look. This is only meant in a positive way. Had a very Jewish look. So we asked, are you Jewish? And the person said no. We knew the person said no because he didn't want to be bothered. He didn't want to be bothered. I don't want to be bothered. You can ask me to put on film. You can ask me to do it. I'm not interested. He said no. So one of my colleagues said, like sort of loud, why did you even ask him? He obviously does not appear to be Jewish. And as soon as the fellow heard that, he turned around. He says, are you telling me that I'm not Jewish? I am Jewish and I'm a proud Jew, and so on and so forth. So it was like a little story where sometimes a little sort of shake out of the ordinary, shake a person up, and all of a sudden their inner essence and their inner core comes out. And so to sort of bring the lesson home of this discussion is the following. Avram Avinu went ahead and he pressured the people to thank God because, and this is, I think, a core message for today as well. Abraham, our father, knew that within the essence of every single individual, whether they consider themselves an atheist, whether they consider themselves a believer, non-believer, whatever it is, the core, because our soul, our very essence, was from, as it says in Genesis, God blew within him and within the person a holy soul, a part of Hashem. So Avram Avinu knew the core of every individual is good. Sometimes there can be sort of dust and dirt that covers that. In order to get past that, to get beyond that, sometimes some pressure, sometimes some additional shakeup needs to occur. And I cannot answer. You have to go to the big synagogue, please. Sometimes what has to happen is a shakeup, and when that shakeup occurs, then all of a sudden the inner good comes out. Sometimes it demands a greater shakeup. Under ordinary circumstances, of course, as I said before, the more loving way, the more embracing way is the way to go. But there are times where pressure, a shakeup, hitting rock bottom needs to occur. But when we have that, let me step back. So what we take from this is a couple of things. Number one, both with ourselves and with our children and with others. First and foremost, there has to be a core belief, and there is a core belief, that every single person in their essence is good. Unfortunately, sometimes there is so many layers of concealment, of sort of addiction to both intellectually and emotionally to something other, or even as a society. Sometimes in society, which I believe is happening in this country, in Western society in general, that there is certain acceptance and an attachment to such unholy and humanly unhealthy society, on a societal level, unhealthy approaches and behaviors and ways of thinking that has become the norm, that the only reason it's the norm is because we've become desensitized to what our true core purpose and mission and who we are. And sometimes it takes a real shakeup again, on a societal level or on a personal level, to reach and to change course, to reach our true selves and to change course from that destructive behavior. So this is what this story and the parsha teaches us. Avram Avinu understood that. And he says, yes, sometimes, and he was effective because ultimately Avram Avinu until today has had an impact on his generation and on all of mankind, the future of mankind, with his approach, both in the most loving way and sometimes in a more coercive way when needed. And as the Rebbe adds, even the coercive way has to be done in a pleasant and loving manner. Because when it comes from a true loving place, it is sensed by the recipient. So that is the thought for today. May we be successful. May we not have to come to a place where we're either pressured or need a good shakeup. May it be something that we realize from within ourselves on our own, inspired in a just happy and good and pleasant manner. As we say when we lift the Torah, dracheh dachinom, its ways are ways of pleasantness. But the knowledge in itself that this is the inner core of humanity, because it all comes from Hashem, who is good and has created us with a purpose and a mission, and a positive mission, and a healthy mission, and a productive mission, etc. This in itself changes the whole mindset, which creates so much more effectiveness in achieving that which we need to achieve for a better world, a holier world, a better society, and that's that. I appreciate and I thank you for the opportunity to share these holy words of Torah. Please share it with others if you can. It's always good. Let's better share words of light, words of Torah, than some of the maybe unholy stuff that's out there. Thank you very much. Have a fantastic week.